What I love about YouTube politics is that it's incredibly easy to find the most basic takes on politics in droves. Go type in Trump supporters regret their vote, or Trump supporters are being lied to. You'll find hundreds, maybe thousands of videos parroting that type of nonsense.
And today's voicemail caller raises a really important issue.
I've just been wondering, why do so many of these Trump supporters seem to not have their own best interests in mind?
I could recount probably every day from the last few decades someone saying this. I've gotten really used to it, most of us have, but I figured it might be interesting to go back a bit further. With the Civil War behind us, slavery made illegal. People who were once property finally had a chance to really take part and vote. It's going to be a lot of caveats in that. Let me go back and actually try again. After the United States gave wealthy white men in the South massive amounts of land and money thanks to the North depriving them of children, as well as men and women, a people who could finally be political found themselves voting. And what did they have to say about it? Today, as in the past, under the Republican leaders' management, they give the word of promise to our ear, but break it to our hope. Deprived of recognition in all places of emolument or honor, deprived of all chances to labor upon the streets and public works, the outlook for the future is gloomy indeed. The hope of better times, held out year after year by the partisan press prior to the elections, is but a snare to delude you into voting against your interest as a working man. And the cry that the sacred cause of liberty is imperiled every time there's an election is but a false beacon set up by local and carpetbagging orators who claim to have the colored man's vote in their pocket, to dispose of it at will to the highest bidder, as though we were not capable of thinking and acting from our own convictions of right and justice. God, 1877. If I took the complexity out of the language and said something like, the Republicans and the partisan press continually utilized this oppressed people's vote as if it didn't matter and they could take advantage of it, it's exactly what we see today. It's word for word what we're hearing Pakman's viewer comment on. Why do people vote against their own interest? Well, that's the thing. It's been 150 years, and it's still the same really easy answer. They don't. So you see, people always vote in their own interest. The problem with political discourse today is we misunderstand what interest means. I'm going to come back to that 1877 piece, don't worry. But for now, let's talk about interest. All right, so best place to start is if we go to this boilerplate view of politics that's been part of democratic processes for hundreds of years. This is the idea. People should vote based on their economic, social, and political self-interest. The challenge with democracy, as they've said, is that people are stupid, foolish, and can easily be tricked into thinking something other than what is in their actual self-interest.
They've been bamboozled by the very strong and well put together messaging machine of the right to believe that they are on the right moral side.
Now, I'm not really trying to pick on David Pakman. It's just, God, he's such a good representation of trite median political commentators. What he's saying here feels like it makes sense. If only they could use logic and reason beyond their base drives and see the reality of things. The veil of ideology, this has blinded them to the truth I can see. I mean, just rephrase it a bit. If people spend time thinking, they can make their emotions get in line. The absurdity of the statement is bare to anyone who's ever really felt an emotion or drive to do anything. Our thoughts have never preceded our drives. It's never been the case. Our drives precede thought. The impulse, the affect, the emotion, these things come first. Then the intellectualization, then the rationalization occurs. That's the thing. You're going to be really hard-pressed to find religious, philosophical, scientific views that say our drives emerge from logical or rational thoughts. This is what drove Wilhelm Reich, famous for commenting on the social world psychoanalytically. He wrote his masterpiece, The Mass Psychology of Fascism, about it. In it, he recounts the rise and fall of the Third Reich, continually stating how unsatisfying the answer is to say that the Germans were all fooled by the Nazis. The question itself assuming drives come after interest, and he knew better. We know now also this, that interest follows drives. So when Reich asked, why did millions vote for their own subjugation, he's starting to ask the right question. As Deleuze and Guattari put it, that is why the fundamental problem of political philosophy is still precisely the one that Spinoza saw so clearly, and that Wilhelm Reich rediscovered. Why do men fight for their servitude as stubbornly as though it were their salvation? How can people possibly reach the point shouting, more taxes, less bread? As Reich remarks, the astonishing thing is not that some people steal. It's not that others occasionally go out on strike, but rather that all those who are starving do not steal as regular practice. All those who are exploited are not continually out on strike. After centuries of exploitation, why do people still tolerate being humiliated and enslaved? To such a point, indeed, that they actually want humiliation and slavery, not only for others, but for themselves. No, the masses, they were not innocent dupes. At a certain point, under a certain set of conditions, they wanted fascism, and it is this perversion of the desire of the masses that needs to be accounted for. And in Anti-Oedipus, they damn well account for it. Now let's start with how they talk about interests. Let's get rid of first the idea of best interests, as if anyone knows what anyone's interests are or ought to be in any capacity for any other person. Instead, let's talk about this pre-personally. Now, this doesn't mean before your personal interest. Instead, we're talking about the interest that forms before you actually have this rational explanation, before you've made it personal. You, the person, you are. This thing is made by the world around you. There's no escaping this. These social experiences you've had, the world you've lived in, layers into you, onto each other over time, creating a multitude of rules, axioms, images, experiences from which you learn and define interests. But these aren't logical. These things are not rational. They're created over time as your drives, your passions, enter the social sphere, return back to you in one form or another, in one organization or another. How's your posture right now? There's this weird thing we teach people. We teach different groups, different types of posture. Not outright, of course. We teach people how to stand, sit, and walk just by having them do. These things aren't really told except in weird classes that people used to do. Rationally, to us, we don't talk about it. Instead, we learn it directly, socially. Even more importantly, though, we immediately judge others based on this posture from the position of our own posture. It's not rational, of course, but you quickly find a way to feel about someone some way, depending on how they're walking and holding themselves. I hate licorice. Swedish people love that shit. They also really don't do sour cream. Instead, they add creme fraiche to their tacos, which is an abomination. Speaking of Mexican cuisine, it regularly serves cheek or cabeza meat in their food. That causes Americans to squirm and run to buy some hot dogs that they'll joke about being made of lips and assholes while they eat them. The social world writes on us, in us, constantly, and that pen overlaps, creating darker, deeper grooves of writing millions of times, billions of times. From here, we respond to the world. How do you feel when you hear the national anthem? How do you feel when you're told to stand and sing the anthem of another country? Now, how do you feel about being told to be quiet while someone else sings their song? How do you feel when you see a cross, a mosque, a drag queen? All of these things bring about emotional responses in some capacity. Take the article I read earlier, the 1877 piece about how Republicans take advantage of black workers abusing their dogmatic devotion to the party that did them, right? You know, you might have felt smug satisfaction hearing that even 150 years ago, people realized the Republicans were lying to the working class and the Dems are the better option. Maybe you were furious. I brought up an example, shitting on Republicans, because in your mind, they've always been on the side of the working man, and it's silly for me to say otherwise. Interests are funny that way. In 1877, we're way before the Southern strategy and the party shift, right? So the Republicans we're talking about, that's Democrats today. That's the Republicans of Lincoln. The piece is less Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and more Candace Owens. Do you feel differently about it now? Yeah, that'll happen. Don't worry though. You will think of a good reason why pretty quickly, and even why you feel embarrassed that you feel this way. We're really fucking good at this. You'll also notice one thing all my examples have in common so far. Their responses to things, moments, food, images, symbols, singularities, single things that you have an immediate visceral response to, even if it's a tiny visceral response. This shit is why we react how we do to Trump or Kamala or the images of the border or Mexicans or blacks or Joe Rogan or Theo Vaughn or Fresh and Fit or Destiny or President Sunday or Kid Not Ken or fucking whatever. It doesn't matter. There doesn't have to be consistency. Not yet. The complex constellations of pre-personal interests within you, they're stochastic. They exist uniquely based on a complex causation chain. It's why someone can both love Ayn Rand and Trump and Rage Against the Machine. Now, intellectually, you may have reasons you react negatively to one and positively to another. Intellectually, you may have reasons both are awful, both are brilliant. Let's say you decided to stake your reputation as a critic of art on the idea that this was real. For an hour, you and some other person who did the same thing laughed about how stupid people were for thinking Rage Against the Machine could possibly be enjoyed by Trump voters and right-wingers. You could dismiss people who do this hour-long podcast as foolish themselves and stupid, as if it's a baby brain take on aesthetics that literally any fucking reading would have opened their eyes to the fact that they're under-equipped in every capacity, academically, intellectually, fucking spiritually. That would be easy. We don't do easy. Instead, I'm going to tell you to go listen to that video. And notice they never actually justify their position logically. They don't develop an axiomatic truth from which they build a series of logically consistent arguments and from there have an emotional response. You know that thing that they act like is real? No, they do the opposite. They laugh at how clearly absurd it is. How obvious. They never go beyond the emotive, the affective. They say they do. They pretend they do. They put on airs as if they have, but they fucking don't. Instead, they talk of these 2 points and the obvious thread between them. And that's the thing, because interest is only part of the story. Your interest is how you react emotionally to things. But that's reaction in that moment, and life is more than just a haphazard collection of moments. We're able to bring a thread through things. We narratively connect them. We create the tapestry as we weave. That thread pulling things together we haven't talked about, we're missing it. It's the part that's being gestured at in that video. Nobody ever puts a finger on it. Why is it Trumpers like Charlie Kirk say that conservatism is the new punk rock? They listen to Rage Against the Machine like Paul Ryan while running with Mitt Romney for president, and they talk about burning the system down. Why is it these people will attack police and crush the very actors of social oppression, crashing through the doors to overturn an election, only to just not want to knock over a velvet rope? I mean, I want a photo. I've got to take a selfie, but I really don't want to step over this velvet rope inside the Capitol. The claim of hypocrisy here, that's a cry for an intellectualized answer, as if anyone were rational first and emotional second. No. Instead, we need to move away from the intellectual and talk about drives. Go put on Rage Against the Machine. What's it do to you? Me? It amps me up. It's my workout music for a reason. It always has been. I can't help but jam to it when I hear it in the car. Their music gets to me. The energy of their mosh pits will never leave me. Seeing them at Red Rocks in '96, Jesus, the energy of the crowd was extraordinary. Their music is powerful, quite literally. It powers me, it pushes me, it drives me, and it did that when I was 14, well before I understood what Manifest Destiny was. I understood lyrics from Rage more as battle to power, huzzah, my people, they took turns, which is actually landlords and power whores on my people, they took turns. You think the lyrics are what sold me on it? Really? I'm betting most of you right now, as I say this, are going to learn that the lyric that everyone jams to, gotta get it together, man, like a motherfucking weatherman, is a reference to terrorist acts committed by the Weather Underground who called themselves weathermen? Or is it that now that I've done this and everyone who's ever said that lyric and jammed to it obviously backs terrorist actions and killings? I mean, that would mean it's the lyrics, right? Not the music, which would mean this is just as good. Love Rage Against the Machine, hate Rage Against the Machine. Be a Trumper, be a Democrat. These are not intellectual first and desires second. Sorry, I'm not going to give you a way to become a perfectly rational actor. In fact, I'm going to say it's not possible. This is for charlatans like Jordan Peterson to lie to you about. No. Drives, they come first. That's the thing that connects all of this thread that matters so damn much. Those drives, where do they go? What is their investment socially? This thread that's always connecting you with this larger social space, doing it quite literally. The powering of that thread sends its hook through things. Desire connects them, threads them. Through threads, you find a reason, post facto, for it all. But that thread, it's not randomly jumping around out there grabbing random things. It's also not really connecting things with a perfectly straight line or knowing what narrative needs to be developed. That's not how it works. Desire is not straight lines. It is not the flow of a river, despite what a badly translated book may suggest. It is an effusion, a flux, an afflux, a reflux, a burst, an orgasm. It's bursting in tiny or massive amounts constantly in tons of ways. It's not the kind of thing you'd measure in terms of length or speed or volume. It's the kind of thing you'd more measure in hertz, voltage, amperage. It's what threads all of this together between those effective responses. There's this off-the-air episode, a great show from Adult Swim's heyday, that my daughter was watching. She's 2. I watch it in the background all the time, and she responds to everything immediately. She sees things. She says how she feels out loud. She's 2. She now thinks that part of that episode is just the best. She loves it. After I recorded this, she would spend weeks repeating it whenever it was up. She started saying ew and yummy to other things, but not always yummy, not always ew, sometimes the opposite. She started doing this pattern and playing with it because, again, the singular things, they don't really matter, not really. The thread, the structure, the empowering of it, the shape of things she wants to get to, it's between points. The many points, including, in this case, me, the TV, my wife, her brother, my phone, food on the table, the lighting, the shit on the television, how it's animated, how the noise is working, the music. God, it's desires pushing into the shapes and codes of the world, pushing through them, being cut, being mangled by them, and then back to us, then again oscillating through it all, pulsing at once all the time. It doesn't know anything intellectual. It doesn't care about anything intellectual. It's the force with which we visit ourselves into the world, or the force with which we find ourselves impotent. It does not stop. Desire is the ritual, not the cracker on the tongue or the wine that you drink. It is the ceremony of life, visited on those singular things. That pulsing that goes through it doesn't get forgotten, laid away. It's repeated, found where it can, pushing where it can. And it shows up where you don't expect. When the Bolsheviks took on Russia, rose up, they were successful in breaking their chains. I mean, the Tsar and his elites, the people around him, these are very much easy people to hate and inspire rage against. The people at large were emotionally charged at them. Desire? The thread? Well, I mean, after the revolution, they needed someone to be in charge, right? What are we going to do until then? During the revolution, we even looked to leaders. These leaders will continue to take care of us, right? The ritual, the structural investment of desire, it's a haunting thing. It's not as haunting as paternalistic bullshit telling other people they're fools and you're brilliant and have some singular understanding of the truth. What the fuck could that ever do politically? Leaves us nothing but discourse. Go on YouTube. Go watch a debate panel. You tell me there's hope in discourse.
You are a white, I'm assuming middle class Asian American. White presenting, I should say.
I'm white presenting?
Those things.
You don't believe in racism?
There's no such thing as racism. It's a effeminate mindset to believe in racism.
God, no. Instead, this approach, what I'm talking about, lets us look at the material realities of the thing and not in some Hassan way. Trump voters, they voted their interests. So did Kamala voters. So did non-voters. Stop trying to take away the realities of people and their unique lives, mashing them into some image that helps you feel better about yourself. Instead, realize those interests and the desire powering them, they're materially produced. They're made by the world. Take it back a bit. That firebrand energy Trump voters pretend to have, as the media says, well, they have it. Some Kamala voters actually had it too. I mean, I did at one point when Waltz gave his big speech. Also, when the DNC had Lil Jon Do turned down for what? But mostly because that song's a fucking jam and I really fucking dig it. And this shit goes both ways. People aren't that unique. How about the Kamala people who voted without being super aroused or excited? Yeah, I'm one of those. Who voted? I voted because I was terrified of the opposition. What Trump might do was my primary reason. I didn't do it with a zealous passion, but I did it anyway. There's Trump voters who did that same thing, that terrified of Kamala and what she could bring, terrified of what Biden could do. They weren't necessarily all huge Trump fans. That's the thing. People vote their interests in almost every capacity. And if they cannot find an interest to vote for, they don't. And that's what made this election. Quite literally, the numbers show us this. People, every single one, they voted their interests, even if that interest was not voting. And one side fucked up. That's it. You may be saying, oh wait, Brooks, if desire comes before thought, how can we ever change it? Doesn't that imply it's deterministic? Look, first, go read Nietzsche, Klosowski, Spinoza, Hume, a bunch of others, kind of a lot of people. Books help with this problem. They especially help because all this time I've already been saying what you can do. Because this is produced materially. Our goals should not be to stop production, to rationally debate and stay in the intellectual space, yelling at each other. Fuck that. Instead, we need to work within how these elements function materially. With those investments of drive, we create new narratives. It's really not hard to do, but they have to be new. New is the thing. Having them lean on old narratives in any way lets things fall back, which is okay too. If you do it, don't stress over it. I mean, look, if the narrative can be made that Donald Trump, the literal meme of wealth, power, and hating the common man, before meme was even a fucking common word, can be suddenly seen as a champion of the everyday man, there's not a lot of limits to what narratives can do for us. Another great example, Vance the couch fucker. That was wrapped in this great idea that Republicans are weirdos. Right-wingers are weirdos. Now, it's absurd on its face. Of course, they're right-wing. They're hyper-conformist. These are people screaming about the absolutism of gender roles and race and all these other silly things. They're invested personally in the very idea of anti-weirdness. They don't like weirdness. It strikes a chord because of that. The things they had positive responses to emotionally suddenly had this other side that they also have negative responses to. This shifts desire. It breaks this repetition, this ritual of life. With that comes what we can do to shift personal interest too. I know I'm a broken record at this point. Get involved in local politics. The more localier, the betterier. Do you know what creates the infrastructure you live within that produces those interests? The thing that made people vote for Trump, the thing that made people vote for Kamala. Do you know what did that? The one thing? Zoning laws. More than anything else maybe on the planet. Do you know the zoning laws in your area? Do you know how they're changing? Do you know the ordinances being passed right now? Grants given, business needs, school problems, issues across the board, literally around you. It is the active production of the interests that voted Trump into office and failed to vote for Kamala. So take stock of what you're doing. Do it right now. Your response, your investment, your emotional reaction. Are you going to just head right to Google? Search for your local town's council meetings, when you can go make comments, when you might be able to run, when you might be able to talk to a council person. Look up the plans, the proposed zoning rules. Call a friend of yours who wants to see change. Maybe you can start something, pick up a book, learn something. Or is that just kind of a lot? Too much. You really need something small. You could drop a like. You could drop a comment. You could subscribe to my channel. You could make comments about how obviously dumb the political opposition is. You could do all these things. Nothing I've mentioned helps the world in any capacity. None of it. It just reinforces those old structures. The same desire paths, the same singularities. But I guess that's in your interest after all.